Hello and welcome back. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to our online viewers for tuning in. And for those of you just joining us, we're here at the Edmonton Global stage inside the Canadian Hydrogen Convention, North America's largest hydrogen event, hosted right here in the Edmonton region. I'm Sherri Bouslama with Edmonton Global, and I'll be your host for this panel. So I'm here with a couple of great panelists. Chief Billy, Kirk, and Sean, thanks for joining us. Let's start with introductions. Chief Billy, can you share a bit about your role?
Tante Nuwaku Maganak, Chief Billy Morin, former Chief of Enoch, Cree Nation, Grand Chief of Treaty 6, and now Board Director at Edmonton Global, and serving in various other leadership capacities in the capital region.
Great to have you here. Kirk?
My name is Kirk Hamilton, and I'm the Engineering Sales Manager at C-Fer Technologies, subsidiary of Alberta Innovates.
Thanks for being here. Sean?
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Sherri. I'm Sean Collins, the CEO of Varme Energy. We're developing waste to energy with integrated carbon capture and storage assets in Alberta.
Thanks for being here. So just before this panel, we shared a trailer of a documentary series that we're working on that's kind of telling the story of the Edmonton region's role in energy transition. We've got a lot of really exciting innovations coming out of this region, a lot of exciting projects, so really wanted to share the story of kind of those exciting things that are happening. Let's start with you, Chief Billy. What role do you think the Edmonton region can play in energy transition?
I think Edmonton would play the foremost role in the country of Canada. You know, Canada's 40 million people roughly. We're known for our natural resources, our huge land base. And Alberta in particular, of course, has been known for decades for oil and gas. This is the Alberta industrial heartland. And to be frank, it's a large carbon emitter and has been for a long time. But where you're going to get the most results in that transition is where those industries have gone to play and are now looking to make the most aggressive transition. So, I think Edmonton, the capital region, through the Alberta industrial heartland, through Heidelberg, through Air Products, through everybody that has come here together today, is probably going to be making the biggest strides in terms of that transition on a scalability aspect. The innovation is already here with the petrochemicals and applying that into new technologies. We have the most sun, maybe arguably southern Alberta, but we have a lot of solar. And again, this region is knocking it out of the park. I mean, we're hosting the biggest hydrogen conference here in North America this week. So it's going to be one of the leaders, quite frankly.
Right, yeah. And from C-Fer's perspective, you guys are doing a lot of work around hydrogen. Kirk, what are your thoughts?
Well, I would sort of build on Chief Billy's comments. I mean, in addition to industry, again, you talk about, again, the innovation sort of ecosystem here, led by, again, Alberta Innovates and C-Fer Technologies and Enoch through the Alberta, the Hydrogen Center of Excellence, the program that we have there, and that it is running now. Again, we had that investment by Alberta Innovates into our two sister organizations that has enabled us to create facilities to validate and qualify new technologies and existing infrastructure so that we can deploy hydrogen into the economy safely and effectively. Primarily, again, looking at how we can move the hydrogen from where it's going to be produced here in the Edmonton region abroad, whether it's across the country, whether it's down into the United States or into overseas markets.
Right. It's hydrogen, but then it's also our amazing capabilities around carbon capture. And I know Varme, Sean, is using those technologies in what you guys are doing. Can you share a bit about Varme and your project that's been announced here for the Edmonton region?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Very, very, very bullish on the carbon capture story. Carbon capture is sort of directly enabling the hydrogen industry in Edmonton to absolutely flourish and take off as well. So it's nice to see. I think we're like 3 of the 5 global hydrogen plants with carbon capture are in Edmonton. So we sort of dovetail into that story for the same reason we were blessed with the sedimentary basin that we're enabled to pull hydrocarbons out of the ground. We can sort of reverse direction and put hydrocarbons back into the ground better than almost anywhere in the world. And so we're developing waste to energy with integrated carbon capture assets. There's about 1,000 of these plants operating in the rest of the world, none yet in Alberta. And so we see there to be a big opportunity to sort of catch up to speed with the rest of the world in sustainable waste management. And then not only catch up, but sort of take the leadership position. We're contemplated to be the first greenfield asset to have integrated carbon capture from day one with waste to energy. And so now you're a landfill-free and carbon-free solution to waste. And so really fundamentally enabled by the industrial base in Edmonton and in Alberta. Biggest CO2 pipeline in the world, the number 2 biggest CO2 pipeline in the world are in Edmonton. The cost of sequestration and the ability that all creates to attract capital. I think you're sort of $12, $13 billion in announced FID projects in Edmonton right now. Yeah. That's probably the most FID projects we've ever had on the board at one period of time in Edmonton region. And so just feels like we're cooking with gas.
It's a really exciting time, right? Yeah.
I say a lot, we've been dealt a royal flush and feels like we're starting to play that hand of royal flush it's been great. It's been a wonderful last couple of years in the Edmonton region.
Yeah, it's an exciting story to tell. And Sean, I think you have an interesting kind of perspective because you were at COP this year. I know we met up with you there and chatted with you about your experience, but you were at COP when the Paris agreements were signed as well. Can you talk a little bit about how you've kind of seen that progress since you were in Paris?
Sure, yeah. I felt like I got to go to the 2 most exciting COPs, so maybe I just got lucky. But I was part of the Canadian contingent for COP21 in Paris in 2015, and it was interesting. It felt like the entire world signing up and agreeing to something. It was I've sort of been tracking and involved in renewable energy since 2007, 2008, and it was a lot of time of nothing happening. And then it sort of felt like for the first moment in time, like you had the launch of the Green Bonds Initiative globally, and it really felt like the mobilization of capital started at COP. And you've just seen it be a straight trajectory where 2022 was the first time more capital was deployed in the world to net zero renewable infrastructure than fossil infrastructure. It really did feel like Paris was the moment where that transition started, and I would say been all in on my career that this is the area to find value in.
Yeah, and Chief Billy, you were at COP28 this year as well. Can you talk a little bit about your experience there?
Yeah, I mean, COP is the world stage, right? It's as he was saying, the biggest stage in terms of getting the most exposure. I think, my experience there was being a part of the Team Alberta delegation. And I thought it was important to recognize that, as a part of Alberta, we're of course part of Canada. And there is that Canadian narrative out there. We are unified in that regard. But I think it's important that Alberta had to go on its own too as well, alongside Saskatchewan, alongside other provincial jurisdictions, because it is a unique Alberta story. And it is important for us to tell us our own story. So, I was pretty happy that, we had different aspects of our leadership, from the Premier right down to, Alberta Innovates and some of those smaller grassroots things that have been starting up for the last little while. And, for me, I was pretty proud to represent Edmonton Global, but also the Indigenous factor in terms of telling the story alongside Shauna Martineau from AIOC on how this is a differentiator also in this region of Indigenous investment. And we were proud to tell that story across the world. I was just in Colombia actually 2 weeks ago telling that story. So it really is a differentiator. And for the first time ever, it was at COP as well on the scale that it was.
Yeah, and Kirk, do you want to share a little bit about your experience? Was this your first COP this year, or have you been to more?
It was my first, yeah. But I think, again, to sort of, my perspective was, it was pretty unique for it being in the UAE, right? I mean, there was a lot of controversy around that, a lot of questions about, well, why them? Why industry? And I think the reality is, this is not an either or thing. And we see this thing about, this polarization of discussions, right? Where you have the environment on one side and economy on the other. And it's very easy to divide. But I think what this demonstrated was the importance of connection and getting rid of that division, because we can't solve this. One camp can't solve it by itself.
Right.
And so having those conversations, and they might be contentious, and there might be areas where there's disagreement, but at the end of the day, if we don't have those conversations, we're never going to eventually work our way towards a final solution. And I think that's one of the things that I took away from this was, while there was that hesitation, it was overcome to a large extent, where they realized, okay, well, maybe we can talk together and come to alignment. And there was, at the end, you saw the announcements at the end of the conference that, hey, we are going to work towards these common goals, and that it does require all of us, not just those that have originally been sort of, I guess, traditional COP attendees.
Right. Yeah, I think, Sean, go ahead.
Yeah, we'll just jump on that. The sense of ambition that came out of Dubai this year, I thought was surprising. Even things like, it was the first time since the 1960s the world has said that they want to build more nuclear power. There was a tripling of global nuclear capacity ambition. Just those sorts of moments where it felt marquee, that there was like a sense of capital deployment and ambition setting that hasn't really been present much in those dialogues before.
Yeah, I think most people, when they think of COP, they think of it like being mostly like government or policy folks at the table. But this year it was really exciting to see a huge showing from industry, right? Being there and being part of those conversations, because frankly, they have to be part of those conversations because they're going to provide a lot of the solutions, right? Like, you know that for sure, Sean. When it comes to energy transition, some would say that you can't have it all. You can't have clean, reliable, and affordable. And I think that was a lot of the conversation we heard at COP this year too. Kirk, what would you say to somebody who says you can't have all three?
Well, perhaps not yet, but just because we can't have it yet doesn't mean it's something we shouldn't shoot for.
Right.
I think we've taken advantage globally of cheap energy, but we're paying for it now in the form of emissions. So that really was the cost. It wasn't a financial cost at the time when we were using it, but now we're paying for it after the fact. So perhaps we shouldn't look at it as affordable in sort of that context, but in the broader sense, the question might be asked: well, what's the cost of inaction? What's the cost of not doing anything to either just ignore the hydrogen opportunity or ignore CCUS as, okay, well, these are just costs that are going to make my current energy consumption costs rise, rather than we're looking at what the broader implications, not only for my kids, but my grandchildren's generations down the road. So,
yeah, no, that's good. Chief Billy, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, just building on what he said, I think it's that the question's like rooted into black and white, or we have to. It's more of a spectrum, right? And it's more of a gradual build. So when I think about even the large projects around the capital region, Air Products is going just over $1 billion. Some of the other capital projects that I'm aware of that are in traditional sectors, like some of the other traditional long-time energy sectors, you're pushing pipelines in Canada for $30 billion. $1 billion compared to 30 is vastly different. We're talking about repowering over at Genesee with Capital Power and going off coal. They took a huge risk in doing that, but I mean, the market itself is actually driving this force for going into the transition, and I think again it's gradual. So you look at the capital costs; they might be a little bit high today, or I would actually argue they're not that high today, but it's going to have a trickle down effect to the consumer, and we're starting to see that here in the capital region already.
Yeah, it's a transition, right? Like it's not, you can't just tear everything down and start from scratch. Like it takes time.
And the only other thing I would add is like you look for tangible ways as an everyday citizen in Edmonton or Alberta or whatever country you're from, and in the 5,000 vehicle challenge is like you can't see yourself in maybe working at the Air Products or the Lindy hydrogen facility, and they have a huge industrial complex for hydrogen production and using hydrogen. But you can see yourself in one of those 5,000 vehicles over at the YEG, and so again, it's trickling down finally into the everyday people.
Yeah. Sean?
I thought those are both wonderful, beautiful answers. I won't try to step on top of those. Maybe I'll just offer a different perspective. I think sometimes we get fixated that, this is just a cost and an annoyance, and I thought you said that beautifully. Like, if you think about it over 50 years, it's probably not a cost. But I would say the other angle to maybe introduce is there's also revenue to be made in the net zero space. I think we don't leave oxygen for that if you're now net zero hydrogen or carbon negative hydrogen or net zero waste or net zero power, there's a premium product available for sale. Even in the carbon capture space, we've gotten multi-$100 per ton offers for carbon credits for the carbon removals. Municipal solid waste is 2/3 organic, and so it's atmospheric carbon dioxide removals. And big companies and brands are now saying, I want to account for my historical emissions that I put up there over the last 30 years. And so those sorts of markets are ones where Alberta just has an opportunity to match the lowest cost of sequestration, the most proven pipelines and well capacity, and be global players from a commodity perspective. Selling our hydrogen, our ammonia, our electricity, like selling our products internationally for a high price. The net zero transition doesn't have to be perceived as a cost. It can be an opportunity for monetization that I think we ignore to some degree.
That's a really good point. When it comes to sort of like partnerships and collaboration, Chief Billy, I'm going to start with you here. How can businesses, Indigenous communities, and government agencies collaborate more effectively to drive the energy transition?
Well, I would give credit where credit's due. So Alberta, there's an article with my good friend Minister Wilson, and Alberta is kind of the hotbed for economic reconciliation, as he would put it, through Willie Littlechild. And the government loan guarantees. Well, I wouldn't love that every every project starts with a government loan guarantee, but we're getting to the point where that's not the case. It really is the differentiating factor that made Alberta invest in large-scale partnerships with First Nations and Métis communities. So, we're seeing, again, everything is on the table when it comes to participation in the economy for Indigenous communities in Alberta. These are not foreign conversations to us where we're being left out at the table. Now we can go to the table with Lindy. Now we can go to the table with Air Products and Dow with government loan guarantees. And you're starting to see that across the country now unfold in terms of Canada in their latest budget go to $5 billion in loan guarantees. So, again, sharing that how we know how to do Indigenous investments and partnership here in Canada, I think is also a differentiator because, the transition is, as we've talked about today, not just the economics, it is the social, it is all those other aspects of society that have to help work together to solve the transition question and the challenge. So, I think those partnerships are setting the tone here in Canada and Alberta Capital Region in particular.
Yeah, and Indigenous communities are going to play a huge role, like as they talked about in that trailer, right? Indigenous people have long seen themselves as stewards of the land, so it's exciting to see them at the table, part of those conversations, and actually benefiting from the transition in terms of economic reconciliation. So yeah, that's really good. So you guys were at COP. I think, there was some criticism locally around the size of the delegation that went to COP. Why are all these people here? What is the purpose of this? Can you speak a little bit about why was it important for you to be there? And yeah.
We should tell those people to shut up. It hurts our economy when that rhetoric emerges.
Yeah.
We should have had 5 times larger of a contingent at COP, in my opinion. The value being delivered to our economy of $12-13 billion of FIDs, all of which are related to net zero. It's net zero plastics, net zero cement, net zero hydrogen, net zero waste. Everything being financed right now is being financed under a net zero thesis. That's the epicenter, that's Mecca of the climate dialogue. I think we're scaring people off the puck of going to these events because we're chirping about a $7,000 total flight bill. When it manifests in $10 billion executed infrastructure in our city, we should be a lot more aggressive at those forums than we are. We're kind of still, I think, a little bit on the sidelines. Edmonton should be screaming from the top of the mountain at those events that we are biggest CO2 pipeline in the world, second biggest CO2 pipeline in the world. The structural advantages we have here, we don't spend enough time celebrating internationally, in my opinion.
I think that's really true. Kirk?
Just to build on that, again, we're touting ourselves as being this leader. Well, that requires presence, and that requires presence at these events that are going to be global. And we have to be mindful of, there might be people that don't understand that yet, but that's just, we're going to get there eventually. Yes, we all have to be there, and yes, we should be a much larger delegation, including a broader spectrum of participants. But, I don't know what else to add to to sort of just respond to the criticism beyond, if we're not there, then who? And we deserve to be there.
Absolutely. Anything to add, Chief Billy?
Well, I know what it feels like to have somebody think they can speak for me. So, even for from the Indigenous perspective, that's very obvious. But again, for that capital region, for the Alberta story, again, we're united in Canada. This is a great country. I think this to live in. It's obviously still, but I think it's very important that we show that we're a diverse country. We're second biggest landmass in the world. Not everything that works in Newfoundland and Ontario is going to work in Alberta, but we do also innovate. We also have a story to share. We have something to offer the world. So it's important that we go as a region, as individuals, as companies that call themselves home here to tell our story across the world and not have somebody else do it for us.
Absolutely. And I just want to say, thank you for being there and for sharing the story of the Edmonton region and what's happening here, because I do think it's an exciting story to tell. So just really appreciate that we have good spokespeople like yourselves and advocates for the region out there sharing those stories. And with that, looks like we're out of time. So again, thanks for being here. We've come to the end of this session. Thank you to everyone for coming by and to our online viewers for watching. We'll be back in a few minutes with the next session, Fueling the Energy Transition. We'll be talking to a couple of folks in the transportation sector. So thanks, and we'll see you soon.